In recent IBF surveys, during the pandemic we're going through right now in 2020, surprisingly, 46% of companies with an established S&OP process are now doing weekly meetings. Why? And is this the right thing to do? I'll tell you what you need to do, and I'll tell you what is right. Let's get to it. Welcome. IBF On Demand. I'm your amazing, fantastic, just moderately okay, host, Eric Wilson. Find me at eric@ibf.org, and you can find more information about IBF at ibf.org. We do have a sponsor, Arkiva, your one-plan S&OP software solution. Thankful to have them on board as well. And I'm thankful to having you on board as well. We just blew by 10 episodes. We're in season 2 now, officially. On to episode number 11, and we couldn't do it without you. We're on our way, blazing to 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, multiple downloads at different podcast platforms as well. So I'm going to continue to thank you and continue, like, share, subscribe if you already haven't as well. And then let me know, comments down below, send me an email, let me know what you think and if there's actually value here or not for you, let me know, because I love to hear from you. We mentioned at the start IBF surveys. We do a lot of surveys. We do a lot of research at IBF as well. And FYI, you can go back. Any members, you have access to all the old research we've done. We've done benchmarking surveys as far as for your S&OP process. And by the way, the next episode is actually going to be about S&OP and the 5-step process. So a little teaser to talk next to what we're going to do. And then today we're going to talk about some of the execution part of S&OP as well. But we did a whole survey, benchmark research on the benefits of S&OP and if you're getting the benefits. It's a little surprising research. We've done salary benchmarking. We've done different types of industry benchmarking. We've done a ton of S&OP, non-S&OP, demand planning, salaries, forecast accuracy, you name it. We got research probably we've done in the past, whole library available to members. So check it out at ibf.org. Check out all the past research we've done. One of the research we did recently during this pandemic was talk to you about what exactly you're seeing as far as downturn, what you're seeing with your S&OP process, and a few other questions as well. And I said, surprisingly, it was a surprise to me that almost half, 46% of the companies out there are saying you've gone to a weekly S&OP cycle. And I said that is surprising to me because I don't see S&OP as a weekly cycle, which was the reason I said why. But there is obviously, I could be wrong if over half the companies are doing it right now. Some other things that came out of that was 14% of the companies out there are starting a new process. Generally, that's around about 15, 20% on average is what we generally see at any conference as far as people, companies there that are starting a new process. So right now, I'm not as surprised about that. 15, 14% are actually starting a new process. 10% just kind of gave up and said, hey, we're not doing any kind of process at all anymore. That pretty much they didn't have a strong enough process that when they had COVID-19 hit and a major black swan disruption to their company, their process didn't survive. It was too much of a shock to that process that they went into the firefighting mode and didn't have a place for strategy at that point, which is understandable. I was surprised it was that high, though, at 10%. But I want to get to that 46%. I want to get to that half that are now doing things weekly. Is this a good option? Not just during a pandemic, but anytime. Is a weekly S&OP process viable? And I know companies that are doing it outside of the pandemic. And then let's look at when you have a shock to the system, a shock to your company, is weekly a good option for you at that point? Are we actually diluting the purpose of an S&OP process? like any times when I have tough questions like this, I ask people smarter than I am. And today is no different. I'm bringing in someone that is able to talk about this weekly process, is actually help companies put together their own processes and as well, understand kind of that strategy versus the tactical versus operational, and can provide those insights to you, the listener, as well. So I want to find out if half these companies are right, what they're doing right, and what's right for you. So I brought in Jeff Baker. Jeff Baker, now he's a principal in integrated demand and supply planning practices at Chainalytics. He's a CPIM, CSCP, CLTD, CPF in SCM. He's got enough initials. He's an expert in this field with extensive experience in demand management and especially S&OP and integrated business planning. He's a principal right now at Chainalytics. He holds a BS in chemical engineering, an MBA, and Masters of Engineering in Supply Chain Management from MIT. He is a recipient of Supply and Demand Chains Pro to Know, and it was last year's IBF Excellent in Business Forecasting and Planning Award. Little known fact, Jeff was actually the very first IBF ambassador we had as well. So with that, I want to welcome on board Jeff. Jeff Baker, welcome. I've been excited.
Hey,
I've been looking forward to having you on.
Hey, Eric, great to be here. Very happy. I'm glad we could make this thing happen.
So hopefully it's weather's nice where you are right now.
Yeah, it's nice, and in the 90s, very humid, so not too bad to be here in the basement and a little air conditioning going on. So yeah, nice.
I'm in a basement studio as well, but it has enough lights, almost like sun. But I get my daily dose of sunshine every day, so I'm okay. As long as I get my sunshine, I'm happy.
Sounds good.
So thank you for joining us. I talked in the introduction. You wasn't there, but I said we've done a survey. And surprisingly, because of what's going on with COVID, because everybody is locked up in basements right now, that sounds wrong. Just you put the lotion, never mind. So since everybody is inside right now, and we're seeing this, disruptions to business, 46%, so almost half the companies right now are doing weekly S&OP processes.
Yeah.
So my thought was why? And is this the right thing to do? The reason I brought you on board to kind of talk about this, exactly what is or can be a weekly process, if it's the best practice, and what do they look like? So with that, I wanted to talk about, is S&OP on a weekly actually something that companies should be doing right now? And it's okay to say no. It's okay to say no.
All right. I'm going to say no to the fact I would not call it S&OP. I would call it S&OE, Sales and Operations Execution. Some people might call it Integrated Tactical Planning. But yeah, it's definitely warranted. And one of the interesting things that I found with one of my clients is we were implementing an S&OP process, and it's starting to become a very mature process. And we saw when this COVID thing hit, it was almost a very natural, organic, like, hey, we need to do this on a more rapid cadence because the things are changing much more rapidly. And because of that, we had this little mini S&OP process that just kind of sprouted up. And it's essentially what that is. It's an S&OE. It's designed to take, the S&OP process, take the outputs for that, translate it into week-to-week execution. It's a step that a lot of people skip, but now obviously it's much more relevant and much more necessary.
You said it was a kind of a natural progression, and that's what I think. When you see half the companies do this, it was a reaction to what was happening. But you mentioned you called it something different. You said an S&OE type. Yeah. So what exactly could you distinguish between an S&OE and an S&OP process?
Well, for S&OP, let's start off with the definition of S&OP. What I say, S&OP is going to be a process that you're looking 3 to 18 plus months out. Okay. So it's designed to be more strategic at a higher level of aggregation, usually on a monthly cycle. You're looking at monthly buckets worth of demand. Okay. One quick way to derail an S&OP process is to focus on that 0 to 3 months. And so we have to have something there. So you have to protect the S&OP process, but you also have to realize there's a lot of execution that happens within that 3-month window. So that's where S&OE really comes into play, is that translation from, we get out of an S&OP meeting and we should have sales plans, sales plans, financial plans, and production plans. Those 3 plans ought to be synchronized. And so think about a golf analogy. I mean, that's your driving, that's your long game. You get into the short horizon, 0 to 3 months, that's your short game. That's you're on the green. Now you got to get there. Okay, so that's an easy way to think about the need for both of them together. You can't really have one without the other.
So the companies that are moving from that monthly cycle to a weekly cycle, they're just filling a gap, but there is a place, Lori, for both processes, even to still exist even during these difficult, challenging times.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially now, I think it's more critical than ever because the changes, the volatility is increasing. It's much higher amplitude and it's coming a lot more quickly. So I think you have to have that very quick response cycle built in there. Yeah.
Okay. So if we kind of divorce ourselves from the executive S&OP process, we'll talk about more of that at the next podcast, and we really focus on that tactical S&OE, tactical S&OP process. You said that because things are changing so much, we have to be able to adapt to right now.
Yeah.
What exactly does that look like? That it's not a duplication of the monthly cycle, or is it just on a smaller scale? What exactly does this weekly cycle look like then for organizations that's trying to do that?
Well, see, I think the critical aspect of an S&OE process versus what we've seen in the past is it should be cross-functional. The nice thing that I saw in this company when this organic process popped up, they were going through the same process, the same methodology, someone from sales, someone from marketing, someone from operations, someone from finance, maybe a little bit lower levels in the organization. So not the VP levels, but maybe that director level down there. They're starting to make the same decisions, going through the same discipline methodology on making decisions. Because one of the problems that you get to, especially in a panic situation, is people start to, they jump back in their functional silos and they make the decisions that are kind of best for their function or what they think they ought to have. And they lose that discipline that we've established at the upper levels of making sure your decisions are cross-functional and you kind of contemplate how we're impacting, how sales might be impacting manufacturing, might be impacting the financial plans as well. So you tend to get the same people, or kind of the lower level, the same functionally, you've got the same representation. You maybe have a level lower in the organization, but you go through the same process of looking cross-functionally, making sure you're making the right decisions. And in fact, it's almost like a training ground for, these people are going to be the future leaders of the executive S&OP process. These are the people that are potentially going to be your next VPs, senior directors. So it's also, from my perspective, it's a good training ground for future executive S&OP talent.
That's an interesting perspective. So you're looking at the same cross-functional teams that may be participating in demand reviews, supply reviews, product portfolio reviews, the same functional areas, just on a lower level, and maybe not as many of those meetings then on a weekly basis is what you're looking at.
Yeah, and you probably want to concentrate more on the exceptions, when something goes wrong. So it's an exception management process. You don't need to fully, drain an entire, supply demand balance for every SKU at every location. So it can be more of an exception management, because if you do a good job with your S&OP process, my perspective is always like, back in the olden days before GPS, when you were on a plane, that plane was off course 95% of the time. But it's making those course corrections, it's setting the right course, making minor course corrections. So when you have to land, then you're actually in the right spot. And so a good job in the executive S&OP is going to put yourself in a good position in the 0 to 3 month time frame to actually be able to execute. You're going to be closer to your target or your landing strip, if you will. So it should be more of, we're trying to execute this plan we were given, making sure supply, demand, finance, those functions stay in balance, and making course corrections as needed. But ideally, your course is already a pretty good one.
Okay, so collaboration, cross-functional, but then also you're not trying to look at every SKU, every week. It's more of an exception-based type of meeting that you're planning then is what you're trying to, in essence, is what you're saying then, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then so we have this meeting now with finance, operations, sales, marketing, director level below, a few other function areas that may be involved with this as well, depending on your organization. What are the inputs into this type of meeting then? What is people bringing to the table to make this an effective S&OE meeting?
It's the same basic things as you're getting from S&OP. What are your current supply demand balances? What's my demand look like? Have there been any changes in the way the customers are behaving? Any spikes in demand? Any downtimes in your manufacturing that weren't necessarily kind of the unexpected things that are going on. So it's the tactical reactions to when the plan goes off the rails. I mean, it's I think it was Eisenhower that said, planning is everything. The plan is nothing. Planning is everything. So we need to plan. We need to, look for these exceptions. So when they pop up, we've got an idea about how to address those. So you really have a lot of the same inputs. It's more of an exception basis. You might see things, during the COVID, what demands were spiking up. We had to kind of very quickly figure out, of these products, which are the core products we want to come, pare down to. Because if you've got a demand spike during COVID, we can't have all the products to all the people all the time. You've got to pare it down to a core. And then you've also, got some impacts in your manufacturing. Maybe a shift doesn't show up or some people are impacted. So those are kind of the short term, what are the differences from what we had planned to what's actually happening? How do we need to respond to that? So more of an exception management type of thing, but basically the same inputs.
Okay, so I mean, I definitely don't want to say that forecast is always wrong because I actually had a whole podcast stating that one. But we can say that the plans are usually not wrong, but they usually don't work like we think they're going to work. So this is a forum where you're on a weekly tactical access that where you can look at where the plans are going astray or not going right, and then kind of recalibrate the organization to a new plan in essence.
Yeah. So one of the other responses in terms of quotes is, plan doesn't survive first contact with reality, and that's what we get. I think Mike Tyson put it funny ways, like everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, and that's oftentimes what happens in, especially in manufacturing. You think everything's going fine, then you get a hiccup somewhere, so you got to be able to respond to that.
Okay, so So the inputs are very similar to what we have in an S&OP process. Demand planning. I mean, that's what majority of our audience out there is right now, working in some type of forecasting, predictive analytics, demand planning type of role.
Yeah.
With that, are they looking at redoing a forecast on a weekly basis and bringing, hey, here's what's changed. Here's what's changed. I mean, what role is forecasting and demand planning in a weekly cycle now, especially during these times when things are changing so quickly?
Yeah, so if you're in a time of rapid volatility, one of the things that we were looking at is looking at actually point of sale data. Look at point of sale data, this year versus last year, and we were looking at year over year changes, and you could very clearly distinguish when the spikes were. You could also distinguish when the spikes were subsiding. So what we could see is it fell into a very familiar pattern versus last year. So that's something that demand management could be doing, is seeing what's the actual consumption data starting to look like. Is it similar? Are there any early indicators? So this would be more of a demand sensing type of thing. We've got our forecast. We know it's not wrong. We're not going to use the W word, but things could change. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at point of sale data and do that demand sensing, because in the short term, that's when you're going to start to see the disconnect between our best guess at the 3-month mark versus what's actually starting to develop, and whether it's developing to the positive side or the negative side, then we can start to take some corrective actions based on that. And similarly for manufacturing, again, if unexpected downtimes, something like that's popping up, we're able to make those adjustments.
Now you've thrown out this 3-month a few times type situation. And I think for a good reference point, 3 months works for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
But are we really just talking about time fences here? I mean, if my lead time is 6 months, then I'm going 0 to 6 months with tactical or operational because that's my lead time. Or if I very fast moving and I can turn things in 2 weeks, I'm really looking out 2 weeks to a month type situation for my operations as well. So I mean that 3 months is a good rule of thumb, but we were talking
Right.
about time fences. I would think is what we're talking about. Correct?
Correct. Yeah. Anything that's kind of inside the planning time fence, you ought to have a tactical process, and anything that's outside the time fence, that's more of a strategic process. So, yeah, we throw out the 3 months. That's kind of a generic rule of thumb. It allows people to wrap their heads around the fact that, we can't make strategic decisions, that are less than our longest lead time. And so we need to think about that ahead of time. And then once we get into that, the die has already been cast. For instance, in a lot of these things, if you do have, your 6 month lead time, not a lot you can do inside that time fence, other than tactically respond to that.
Okay. So I think you've given some great just best practices or an overview of what an S&OE is. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's consensus, it's collaboration, cross-functional. It's pretty much a mini S&OP. You're bringing a lot of the same people just at lower levels. You're looking at bringing in a lot of the same inputs. It's more demand sensing. It's within a time fence. So I think you've laid out pretty much an excellent overview of an S&OE. So then my next question was those 46% that have gone from an S&OP to, let's call it an S&OE, let's call it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
Is there an either or can there be both? And how do these companies actually still maintain the S&OP with an S&OE process in place? And how do they, can both exist during these times?
Yeah, I think both definitely do need to exist during these times. Yeah, for instance, in an executive S&OP process, one of the things we're talking about now is what does new normal look like? What happens if we have a reemergence of COVID that has another spike? What does another spike look like? What does a spike look like on a period of maybe we're coming into a peak season? How do we start to plan that? Those are very strategic, long-term questions, especially if you're looking at you might be out of capacity. You might have to start thinking about co-manufacturers. You may want to dozens of things you could potentially be looking at, but you definitely need to have that strategic view, because irrespective of how turbulent right now is, the future, sometime in the future, you're going to hit with that same turbulence. So it helps to plan what is going to happen. If, again, going back to the comment of like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to plan for different eventualities. And so when the future does hit, it's something I've thought through. It may not be exactly what I think, but I've thought through that at least. So from my perspective, you have to have an S&OP process. So that's going to surprise you, Eric, because oh my gosh, Jeff is a big S&OP fan. So from my perspective, you have to have that. On the other hand, S&OE is a strategic imperative, a tactical imperative. You have to balance supply and demand to get stuff to your customer in the near term window. So you got to have it. The question is that going to be an efficient and effective process? Most companies are really, really good at ensuring that we meet our customers' demand, right? Like, we're going to meet the customer's demand 100%. So everyone's got 100% customer service level targets, or maybe they go, okay, I'll get 99.5% maybe, but we're always going to service the customer. And they do that. And the problem is, in the background, think of all the hoops that you're jumping through. I mean, I'm changing manufacturing schedules. I'm expediting raw materials, which is a pain in the neck to my suppliers. I'm expediting shipments. There's all kinds of hoops in the background, and the customer doesn't see it. We don't want them to see that chaos, but in the background, there's a lot of inefficiency going on. And when we say inefficiency, that's when the financial people, their ears perk up and they go, oh, you mean we're losing money? I'm like, yeah, you're losing money. So to make sure you're profitable, you have to have an efficient response. It helps to have thought through this and be able to execute that, again, on a cross-functional basis, because there ought to be a playbook that all the functions have talked about and all the functions understand, that's executed when some of this volatility hits. And an S&OE is a good way to make sure that what we've thought in an S&OP process does get translated and does get executed on the tactical and the near-term perspective. So those ideas, those plans stay in sync, and you don't devolve into this firefighting, every function for themselves, or a complete disconnect where, hey, manufacturing's down, but sales is still doing their buy one get one promotion.
Huh. So we only got time for one more question, just about 2 minutes left. But so it sounds like half the companies then out there, they're not wrong for going to a weekly type of tactical, especially during this turbulent time.
Right.
But they are wrong for abandoning the strategy in the S&OP process as well. So they're half right, half wrong.
Yeah.
So for the other 15% of the companies, or sometimes 20% of the companies that's starting a new process right now, do you start with the strategy in the S&OP, or do you start with the tactical in S&OE and build to the strategic side of it, or do you do both at the same time? So for the companies just starting out, what's your advice?
For companies just starting out, it's going to be a heavier lift to do the S&OP, but that's, from my perspective, that's where the value is. It's going back to my airplane analogy. I need to put the airplane in the right direction. If I don't put it in the right direction, and I'm working on my landing skills, I'm not. It's going to be havoc. Or back to the golf analogy, I could be working on my short game, but if I can't drive, it's going to get messy. So I always want to start with an executive S&OP process, engaging the executives, because the executives set the cross-functional requirement. They set the tone. They set the approach. It is very easy to, if you have an S&OP process and the CEO and the CFO and the chief marketing officer and the SVP of sales, if everyone is doing S&OP, it's very easy to translate that down to execution. It's a really heavy lift to convince from an executional standpoint. Hey guys, you need to work together, be cross-functional, consider each other, and help each other run the business executionally when everything's burning down around you. That's going to be more difficult. So I would always suggest look at the executive process first. That sets the culture. So another one of my favorite quotes is, the culture will eat strategy for breakfast. That's a Drucker quote. But the fact is, if I can get the culture moving in the right direction, that's going to permeate the entire organization, and that's going to filter down to the people that are actually doing the executional stuff. So that'd be my recommendation. Start with the executives.
Hey, I want to thank you, Jeff. That was some great insights. I mean, you definitely you hit on the topic that I wanted to discuss with the recent survey. You gave some good insights and some great, advice at the end of what exactly we should be focusing on. So I knew it would be, and I'm glad I finally had you on board and be able to talk about this.
It's a pleasure doing this, Eric, and love working with you. So let me know when we can do it again.
All righty. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye, guys.
Bye. So we learned a lot there in that interview. It's packed full of information. One of the things we figured out is S&OPs fail partially because the focus gets diluted. The other thing we saw is S&OP needs to maintain strategy. There needs to be a strong S&OP process, especially when there's uncertainty. And the reasons they do not have, the reasons like S&OP kind of break down is because they don't have that execution, that strong tactical process that they can rely on during these times or during any time. So by no means am I a fan of more meetings. I don't recommend that, we have a product review, demand review, supply review, executive review, and then we're throwing in another weekly tactical meeting over and above that. I'm not a fan of extra meetings. At the same time, I'm a huge proponent, a huge fan of communication, collaboration, and transparency. If there's one lesson we've learned more than any other during this pandemic, during these times of a black swan, during these times of uncertainty, the companies that are doing the best are the ones that doing the best at communication, collaboration, and transparency. And if you heard everything Jeff talked about, that's in essence what we saw in his S&OE or any kind of tactical S&OP type process. It's communicating. It's collaboration. It's cross-functional. It's transparency. It's sharing information when you're getting that information, and have everybody that needs to know that information see that information and be able to react to that information. That's what we're looking for, and that's what a company needs as well. So when you're looking at that S&OP S&OE or S&OP tactical operational meeting, I don't care what you call it over here. Once again, I'm not big on names. Whatever we're going to call it, they're separate meetings. They're separate processes. I want to call them they're separate processes. So shame on me for calling them me. They're separate processes, but at the same time, they're equally important. So you need to look at creating a process that supports a strategic S&OP process. And you need to find a process that supports your S&OE or tactical operations as well. Whichever one you don't have in place, you need to look at the other one to start augmenting what you currently have. With that, it's important though, if you're building another meeting, another process, you're bringing more people involved, it's important they're there for the right reasons and you have the right people there. He talked about the same kind of cross-functional teams, just lower levels. One of the things I'd recommend is actually consider the RACI chart. Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. It's a standard project management type of process you look at, but put that to the people there. For the people that are going to be involved in your S&OP process, the people that's going to be involved in your S&OE or tactical operational process, look at who's responsible in that meeting, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who just can be informed. The consulted, there may be an ad hoc. You bring them in when you need them. The informed, find a way to communicate and have that information flow to them. They may not need to be there on a weekly cadence type situation. The ones that's accountable and responsible, they're the ones in the room. Figure out who's at for each function, what functions are accountable, and who needs to be, what functions are consulted, which ones people need to be informed. And then the same way you have with an S&OP process, with an S&OE or tactical operations, be purposeful and be consistent with your meetings and process as well. It's not complicated, but it's a necessity. So a lot of companies are finding the ways by default meeting now weekly. Hopefully through this podcast, we gave you some advice of what you can do in those weekly meetings. And hopefully I've convinced you, or Jeff's convinced you, that you need to still have a strong S&OP process. If you want to look at your current S&OP process, especially now while it's in disarray, while things are going on, there's no better time than right now to look at your S&OP process. If you want IBF to help you with that, be happy to help. We can do an audit of your current S&OP process. We can look to see where you are with your S&OP process and look to see what gaps you may have as far as best practices. Next week, we're going to talk about the 5 steps, and we're going to talk more about that. But there's a lot more that goes into it as far as one number, consensus, the right functions, the right people, the right culture, all those different aspects. Be happy to do an audit and take a look at your current process and give you some gaps that you currently may have. Just reach out to me, eric@ibf.org. It's eric@ibf.org, or look at IBF website for more information on that as well. There's a lot of great research there I mentioned at the very beginning. Check out the research while you're there. Some benchmarking as far as forecast accuracy, some other information about S&OP. Find out some of the surveys we're doing right now and exactly, I said, how you're measuring up. This brings us to an end of another IBF podcast. These are fun to do. I'm excited about doing them. I look forward to doing the next one. Hopefully you look forward to listening to the next one. If you have any advice, I'd love to hear it. If you have any points, love to hear them. I said you can always reach out to me. I love hearing from everybody else, and I love hearing from you. And with that, I want to thank our sponsors, IBF, your one-plan S&OP software solution. I want to thank IBF for helping put this together at IBF On Demand podcast. Thank you for making it 30 minutes with me and getting the full view instead of the 8 minutes and then checking out like so many other people do. So thank you for watching to the end. And with that, I'll see you in a couple weeks. And don't forget, wash your hands.